Her father said about the slave, "He's property." Then she said, "He's my future husband." On the courthouse steps, a planter's daughter speaks words that shake the very ground. Gasps echo like thunder as she claims a slave as her intended. But when the overseer waves papers sealed in brown wax, a small girl with eyes sharp as steel notices something wrong. Storm clouds gather. Hounds bay in the distance. A hidden Bible holds secrets written in margins thin as spider silk. The girl's memory holds the key indigo wax, flecked with mill grit, versus plain brown lies. A family ring bears a crest that could prove everything, but patrollers ride hard through the rain, and time is running out like sand through fingers. In a chapel-turned-courtroom, 3 pieces of evidence will decide everything: forged papers, a widow's Bible, and a ring that catches the lamplight like truth itself. When the judge calls for proof and the crowd leans forward, will a child's perfect memory and a mother's hidden promise be enough to free a man's soul? Or will lies triumph when the final seal is pressed? Dawn crept through the kitchen windows like smoke from dying embers. Steam rose from iron pots, and flour dust caught the ladder light that slanted across wooden tables, still warm from yesterday's bread. Dinah pressed her bare feet against the pine boards and hummed low in her throat, a hymn that matched the rhythm of ferry poles dipping into river water. The sound rose pure as creek water over stones. Perfect pitch, Aunt Liddy called it. A gift that could find the right note in any song, the right memory in any muddle. Cornmeal, molasses, dried apples. Eliza Ashford counted jars along the pantry wall, her voice soft as morning fog. Black mourning lace still trimmed her sleeves, though her mother had been buried 6 months past. Salt pork, pickled turnips. Dinah repeated the list without pause. Cornmeal, molasses, dried apples, salt pork, pickled turnips. Her fingers found the red ribbon tied around her thin wrist. She touched it when words needed holding tight. Eliza turned, wonder brightening her grey eyes. "I only said that once. I can remember it all," Dinah whispered. The ribbon warmed under her thumb. Outside, wagon wheels creaked on gravel. Both girls froze. Debt riders came early, before folks could hide what needed hiding. The kitchen hands scattered like sparrows, leaving only the tick of the clock and the bubble of porridge in copper pots. "Miss Eliza," Dinah's voice stayed steady though her heart hammered. "The jars for church charity, we could move them to Aunt Liddy's cabin, so they ain't here to count." Eliza nodded quick. Her hands shook as she lifted a jar of preserves. "We'll keep this household together, won't we, Dinah?" "Yes, miss. We will." Steam lifted from the copper pot as Dinah touched the red ribbon on her wrist and whispered again, "I can remember it all." The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the fog that clung to the river bottom. In the yard behind the big house, Mr. Ashford's shoulders bent like he carried stones instead of air. Silas Crowell stood too close to him, whispering words that made the master's face go pale. "The Ferguson note's due Thursday," Silas said, his voice sharp as a hoe blade on hard ground. "And the Whitman debt after that. You got to sell something, or they'll take everything." Dinah crouched by the kitchen door, still as a rabbit in tall grass. She watched Josiah stack cordwood near the tool shed, his movements steady and sure. 22 years old with hands that could read words off a page or split oak logs clean through. The late Mrs. Ashford had promised him training work, not field labor. But promises died with the folks who made them. Josiah's strong, Silas pressed. Young. He'd bring good money at the landing. Enough to satisfy the Ferguson note, maybe more. Mr. Ashford's voice cracked like old leather. His mother raised him in this house. My wife meant for him to learn the ledgers. "Your wife's dead. Debts ain't." Silas pulled a folded envelope from his coat. Dinah glimpsed brown wax on the seal, dull as mud, not the bright blue of the clerk's official stamps. "Got a buyer already. Ferry leaves first light. Papa?" "No." Eliza's voice cut across the yard. She stepped from the kitchen door, her spine straight as a fence post. "Josiah stays." Silas laughed, a sound like gravel in a bucket. "Miss High and Mighty speaks for property now?" "He's not property." Eliza's hands fisted in her skirts. He's what I say he is. Mr. Ashford's words came out tired and heavy. "Pack your things, Josiah. You leave at dawn." Josiah set down an armload of wood. He didn't speak, just nodded once and walked toward the quarters. His footsteps left prints in the dust, each one a small wound in the earth. The brown wax caught the sun mud-dull, not indigo-flecked, like the real seals Dinah had seen at church gatherings when Clark Pike visited to witness marriages and land trades. She tucked the detail away in her mind, bright as a coin in a deep pocket. Aunt Liddy's cabin sat in the shadow of the big house, close enough for birthing calls but far enough for herb smoke and secrets. Steam rose from kettles, and bundles of camphor and sage hung from the rafters like dried tears. Rain had started, gentle at first, then drumming harder on the shake roof. "She's got the memory of an old wise woman in a child's body," Liddy said, grinding roots with a pestle. Her dark fingers moved sure and quick. "Tell me again what you saw, little one." Dinah described the brown wax seal while Eliza paced between the cot and the window. "It didn't have the grit flecks. The real ones do, from the mill wheel where they mix the dye. Sharp eyes," Liddy murmured. "But sharp eyes won't stop a sale paper, real or false." Eliza stopped pacing. Her face went still as pond water. "Mother's Bible. Dinah, you remember. Everything. Do you remember Mother writing in that Bible by lamplight?" "Yes, miss. The widow's Bible, with the torn cover. She wrote small in the margins when she thought nobody was looking." "What kind of writing?" Dinah closed her eyes and let the memory rise like steam from a kettle. "Names, household names, and marks about liberties. Freedom papers for the ones who earned them." Liddy's pestle went quiet. "Child's telling truth. Your mother did keep notes. Private-like. About promises made and debts of honor." "Where is it?" "Hidden in the loom room crawl space." "Been there since the burying." Liddy touched Dinah's shoulder. "But you'd need a small hand and a steady heart to get it." Rain pecked the cabin roof harder now, like nervous fingers drumming on a table. Eliza looked at Dinah, and something passed between them, a silent promise, woman to woman, no matter the years between. "Bring a small hand and a steady heart," Liddy repeated, her voice soft as the herb smoke that wound around the rafters. The attic crawl space above the loom room smelled of dust and old wood. Dinah wriggled through the narrow opening, her small body fitting where grown folks couldn't go. Spider webs caught in her hair, and field mice scurried away from the light of Eliza's candle. "Careful," Eliza whispered. "Mother would have wrapped it in oilcloth." Dinah's fingers found the package wedged behind a roof beam. The Bible felt heavy for its size, leather cover soft as old skin. She backed out of the crawl space and handed it to Eliza with careful hands. They sat on the loom room floor while rain drummed overhead. Eliza opened the Bible to the Book of Ruth, and there in the margin, written in pencil so light it looked like spider tracks, were names and notes in Mrs. Ashford's careful hand. "Josiah," Eliza breathed. Her finger traced the writing. "Born in this house, training promised for ledger work and teaching. Upon completion of said training and marriage under a Christian blessing," she stopped, reading ahead in her mind. "To be freed by witness of the Clark's indigo-flecked wax seal." Dinah's finger came to rest beside. "Josiah," the graphite shining like a thin river in the candlelight. "Your mother wrote his freedom, didn't she, miss?" "She did." Eliza's voice shook like leaves in wind. "But it needs the right seal to make it legal. And a Christian blessing." She closed the Bible, careful as handling eggs. "We have to get to the courthouse before that ferry leaves." Thunder rolled across the river bottom. The storm was building, and dawn would come too soon. But in the margin of an old Bible, hope had scratched out a foothold, thin as pencil lead but strong as any chain. The courthouse steps gleamed wet from the morning rain. Townsfolk gathered for the weekly court session, their boots scraping on stone worn smooth by years of supplicants and witnesses. Dinah pressed close to Eliza's side, the widow's Bible clutched tight in her small hands. Mr. Ashford stood near the clerk's desk, his face grey as ash. Silas Crowell whispered in his ear like a devil at a prayer meeting. Josiah waited by the ferry landing, his few possessions tied in a bundle. He kept his eyes down, but Dinah saw how his hands trembled. "Papa," Eliza's voice carried across the courthouse yard, "we need to talk to Clerk Pike before any papers are signed." "Mr." Ashford turned, and Dinah saw how the debt troubles had carved new lines around his eyes. "Eliza, this is men's business. Go on back to the house." "No, Papa. This is family business." She climbed the courthouse steps, her morning dress rustling with each movement. People turned to stare. Ladies didn't speak up in courthouse yards, especially not about slave sales. Silas stepped forward, the brown sealed envelope in his hand. Mr. Ashford signed the bill of sale. Boys already sold to a planter downriver, legal and binding. Clerk Pike squinted at the papers, his spectacles sliding down his nose. He was an honest man, but hurried, and the rain made everyone eager to finish business and get indoors. "Wait," Eliza's voice rang clear as a bell tower. "I need to witness this transaction." As family, Mr. Ashford's face reddened. "Eliza, enough. You're embarrassing us." She turned to face the crowd, her chin lifted high. "Josiah is not property to be sold." A murmur ran through the gathered folks like wind through wheat. Silas laughed harsh. "Course he's property. What else would he be?" Eliza's hands shook, but her voice stayed steady. "He's my future husband." The words hit the courthouse yard like lightning. Gasps echoed off the stone steps. A patroller by the ferry landing let out a whoop of disbelief. Women covered their mouths. Men shuffled their boots and stared. "Eliza!" Mr. Ashford's voice cracked like a whip. But she didn't back down. She stood there in her mourning lace, facing down the whole weight of custom and law. "I will marry him under a Christian blessing, as my mother intended. It's written in her Bible." Silas shoved the forged papers toward Clerk Pike. "This is riot talk. Sign the sale and be done." Pike looked from the papers to Eliza, to the crowd of witnesses. His hand hovered over his seal, uncertain as a weather vane in shifting wind. Dinah stepped forward. Her voice came out small but clear. "The wax seal's wrong, Mr. Pike. It ain't got the indigo flecks from your mill grit." The clerk stopped, his hand frozen above the papers. He looked closer at the brown wax, then at Dinah, then back at the seal. The lie hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire, ready to collapse under the weight of truth. The crowd pressed closer, sensing something beyond ordinary courthouse business. Dinah's observation about the seal had planted doubt like a seed in rocky ground. Clerk Pike held the forged papers up to the light, studying the brown wax that looked wrong in the morning sun. "Now see here," Silas blustered. "Little slave girl don't know nothing about official seals." But Pike was frowning. "Child might have a point. This wax is plain brown. I use indigo-dyed wax, mixed with mill grit for texture. Been doing it that way for 10 years. Eliza opened the widow's Bible with careful hands. "Mr. Pike, my mother wrote a manumission clause in these margins. It mentions witnessing by your indigo-flecked seal." She showed him the page. "Mrs. Ashford's pencil marks clear as creek water over stone." Pike read slowly, his lips moving with the words. When he finished, he looked up at Mr. Ashford with something like pity in his eyes. "This is legal writing, Tom. Your wife knew her letters and law. Says here Josiah gets freedom upon completion of training and marriage under Christian blessing." He tapped the page with one finger. "Witnessed by my official seal, Mr." Ashford's face crumpled like old paper. "I can't fight the debts, Horace. Creditors want their money." "Then we'll find another way," Pike said quietly. "But this boy's got a legal claim to manumission, and your daughter's got the right to witness the process." Silas's face went red as a rooster's comb. "You can't let a slip of a girl upset proper business. Proper business is what I determine in this courthouse." Pike's voice carried the weight of law and long practice. "I need time to study these papers proper. Both sets." He looked at the forged sale, then at the widow's Bible. The brown wax seemed to darken under his scrutiny, like dirt under rain. "Court stands recessed until I can verify the authenticity of these documents," Pike declared. "Boy stays on Ashford land until this matter's resolved legal." A cheer went up from some in the crowd, folks who'd known Mrs. Ashford and respected her memory. Others grumbled about uppity slaves and foolish girls, but the law was the law, and Pike was its voice in this county. Eliza closed the Bible and held it tight. Josiah looked up from the ferry landing, hope dawning in his eyes like sunrise after a hard night. The brown wax had failed its test. Truth was rising like floodwater, slow but sure. Thomas Pike ran his finger along the edge of the forged papers, feeling for telltale signs of hasty work. In his office behind the courthouse, ledgers lined the walls like soldiers standing watch. Dinah sat cross-legged on the floor, the widow's Bible open in her lap, while Eliza paced the narrow space between desk and window. Tell me again about the seal colors. Child, Pike said, settling his spectacles higher on his nose. Dinah touched her red ribbon and let the memory flow clear as spring water. At the church socials, when you witnessed the marriages and land trades, your wax was always blue dark, indigo dyed, with little white flecks like pepper in cornbread. From the grit at Mathis Mill where they grind the dye powder. Pike nodded, slow, sharp eye. I've been using that mixture since I took this position. The grit marks official. Documents makes them harder to copy. He held up the brown sealed papers. This wax is store-bought. Plain as mud. Through the window, they could see Silas pacing the courthouse yard like a penned bull. Mr. Ashford sat on the steps, his head in his hands. Word had spread through town faster than fire through dry grass. Planter's daughter claims she'll marry a slave. Forged papers caught by a child's keen eye. The margin clause is legal writing, Pike continued, studying Mrs. Ashford's careful script, but it needs proper witnessing to take effect. A Christian blessing, performed in public, with my official seal, to record the manumission. He looked up at Eliza. You understand what this means? The challenges you'll face? Eliza's voice stayed steady. I understand my mother's wishes. And my own heart. A knock rattled the door. Aunt Liddy slipped inside, her healer's bag clutched tight. Mr. Pike, I need to speak to you private-like about Mrs. Ashford's last wishes. She waited until Pike nodded, then continued. The night before she passed, she gave me something. Said it might be needed someday to prove promises made. Liddy opened her bag and withdrew a small cloth pouch. A ring. Been in the family for generations. She loaned it to someone years back, someone she meant to protect. The ring caught the lamplight as Liddy placed it on Pike's desk. Gold band worn thin by years of wearing, topped with a crest that showed a tree with roots deep and branches wide. Below the tree, words in Latin that Pike squinted to read. Fides et veritas, he translated. Faith and truth. Dinah leaned closer, studying the crest with eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Pike, that tree looks just like the mark you press in your sealing wax. The same shape, with the roots spreading wide. Pike's breath caught. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out his official seal, a brass stamp with a wooden handle worn smooth by use. He held it next to the ring, comparing the images. The tree shapes matched exactly. Not similar, not close identical, down to the smallest branch and root. Merciful heaven, Pike whispered. This ring bears my family crest. My grandfather's seal, thought lost years ago. He looked at Liddy with wonder. How did Mrs. Ashford come by it? She never said. Just called it the Keeper's Ring and made me promise to guard it safe. Liddy's voice carried the weight of solemn vows. Said it would prove the truth when lies tried to crowd it out. Pike turned the ring over in his palm, feeling the weight of old gold and older promises. If this ring authenticated Mrs. Ashford's promises, then her margin clause carries the full weight of law. The crest proves intent to honor legal obligation. Outside, thunder rumbled across the river bottom. The spring storm that had threatened all morning was building strength, and the air felt heavy as wet wool. Rain speckled the window glass, each drop catching light like a tiny jewel. Storms, coming hard, Eliza said, watching clouds pile up like hay bales against the sky. Roads will be mud by evening. Pike stood and moved to the window. Silas has been talking to patrollers. If they decide to move against you tonight, storm won't stop them. Might encourage them fewer witnesses, harder to track afterward. Dinah's fingers tightened on the Bible. Where can we keep Josiah safe till morning? Liddy's cabin, Pike said. But if they come with dogs and warrants, even that won't shelter him long. Aunt Liddy hefted her bag and stood. I'll prepare the herbs and bandages, and send word to Eben Yates at the river crossing. He's got the only boat that can navigate flood water safe. She paused at the door, her hand on the latch. Child, she said to Dinah, you keep that memory bright and your courage steady. Truth's going to need both before this storm passes. The rain drummed harder against the window as Liddy slipped out into the gathering dark. Pike locked the ring and Bible in his strongbox, and Eliza helped Dinah to her feet. We'll get through this, Eliza whispered, though her voice trembled like leaves in wind. Dinah touched her ribbon and nodded. The storm was coming, but so was the morning. and sometimes truth needed darkness to test its strength before it could shine proper in the light. Aunt Liddy's cabin felt smaller, with 3 people, a storm, and the weight of borrowed time pressing down like a fever. Herbs hung thick from the rafters, and the air smelled of camphor and secrets. Josiah sat on the rope bed, his hands steady as he helped Liddy prepare bandages and poultices for whatever the night might bring. "You sure about this, Miss Eliza?" His voice was quiet as creek water over stones. "Lot of trouble for one man's freedom." Eliza looked up from where she was cutting clean cloth into strips. "It's not just your freedom, it's Mother's promise. It's doing what's right when everything else is wrong." Rain hammered the roof like drumsticks on a tight hide. Through the single window, lightning flashed across the yard, showing the big house dark and shuttered against the storm. Mr. Ashford had taken to his study with a bottle of brandy, and the hands had scattered to their quarters to wait out whatever was coming. Dinah curled up near the hearth, the widow's Bible wrapped in oilcloth on her lap. She'd memorized every word of the margin clause, but holding the book gave her comfort like a warm stone in a cold pocket. "Tell me the hymn," Josiah said suddenly. "The one you were humming this morning." Dinah's voice rose soft and true. "Where the door swings wide, where the lost can hide, where mercy flows like a river." The melody wound around the cabin like a gentle ghost. Josiah hummed the harmony low in his throat, and even Liddy paused in her work to listen. Music had power to calm spirits and bind hearts together, and they needed all the binding they could gather. Outside, dogs began to bark. Not the regular nighttime chorus of farmhounds, but the sharp, urgent baying of tracking dogs on a scent. "They're coming," Liddy breathed. Eliza blew out the lamp. In the darkness, they could hear voices calling through the rain, boots splashing in puddles, the creak of saddle leather, patrollers moving fast and purpose-driven. "Back room," Liddy whispered. "There's a root cellar under the floorboards, space for 2 if they lie still." But Josiah shook his head. "If they find me hiding, it'll go worse for all of you. I'll step out, face whatever comes." "No," Eliza's voice cut sharp as a blade. "We stick together. Mother's ring proves your legal claim, and that's worth fighting for." Heavy boots tramped across the yard. Through the window, Dinah saw lantern light dancing between the trees. The patrollers were spreading out, checking every outbuilding and shelter. Liddy pressed a small leather pouch into Dinah's hands. "Herbs for fever and pain. You might need them before morning." A fist pounded on the door. "Open up. Official business." Liddy took a deep breath and lifted the latch. Silas Crowell stood in the doorway, rain streaming from his hat brim. Behind him, 2 patrollers with rifles and a pack of hounds, straining at their leads. "Where is he?" Silas demanded, pushing past Liddy into the small space. "Where's who?" Liddy's voice stayed level as pond water. Silas grabbed a burning stick from the hearth and held it high, throwing wild shadows on the walls. The light found Eliza and Dinah huddled near the back wall, but the bed was empty, quilts thrown back. "Don't play games, old woman. The boy's a runaway now. Refusing lawful sale. Stirring up trouble. We'll find him whether you help or not." One of the patrollers stepped forward. "Check the root cellar, Silas. Floor looks disturbed." But before anyone could move, a voice came from the doorway. "No need to tear up Liddy's floor." Josiah stood in the rain, his shirt plastered to his skin, hands raised where they could see them. "I'm here. No hiding, no running." Silas grinned like a fox in a henhouse. "There's the troublemaker. Chain him up, boys. We'll sort this out at the lockup." "Wait." Eliza stepped forward, her voice carrying authority despite her youth. "This man has a legal claim to manumission under my mother's written will. Clerk Pike is reviewing the documents." "Pike ain't here," Silas sneered. "Gone upriver to settle a land dispute. Won't be back till week's end." He nodded to the patrollers. "Storms washed out the roads anyway. Nobody travels in this weather." The lie hung in the air thick as the herb smoke, but there was no way to prove it false. Rain drummed harder on the roof, and lightning split the sky like God's own signature on a dark page. But as the patrollers moved toward Josiah, a sound rose from the river, 3 long, low horn blasts cutting through the storm. Dinah's head snapped up. She knew that signal. "It's Eben Yates," she whispered. "The ferry's running." Silas cursed and grabbed Josiah's arm. "Don't matter. Boy's coming with us now. Before any more folks get ideas about interfering with lawful business." Lightning flashed again, and in that brief moment of brightness, Dinah saw something that made her heart leap. At the edge of the yard, a lantern swung 3 times Eben's emergency signal for safe passage. The boat was in the reeds, waiting. All they needed was a way to reach it. The storm raged harder, turning the yard into a shallow lake and the road into a river of mud. Inside Liddy's cabin, the standoff stretched tight as a fiddle string. Silas kept his grip on Josiah's arm while the patrollers blocked the doorway, their rifles ready for trouble. "This ain't legal," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the fear that made her hands shake. "You can't take him without proper papers from a judge." "I got all the papers I need." Silas patted his coat pocket where the forged sale documents rested. "Signed and sealed, legal as Sunday prayers." Liddy moved slow toward her herb table, gathering supplies as if preparing for a normal birthing call. But Dinah caught the gleam of a small knife among the bandages, and the way Liddy's fingers tested the weight of a brass pestle. Thunder crashed overhead, and in the rumbling aftermath, Dinah heard something that made her pulse quicken, the sound of a hymn drifting through the rain, faint but clear, coming from the direction of the river. Eben was singing their agreed signal. The boat was ready, but time was running short. "We need to get to the ferry landing," Dinah whispered to Eliza. "Eben won't wait long in this storm." Eliza nodded barely, then raised her voice. "Mr. Crowell, if you're taking Josiah, I'm coming too." "As a witness to ensure proper treatment," Silas laughed harsh. "You ain't going nowhere, miss. Your father's got enough troubles without his daughter chasing after slaves in a thunderstorm." "I'm not a child." Eliza stepped toward the door, her chin lifted proud. "And I won't be ordered about by an overseer." The insult hit home. Silas's face went red as a turkey's wattles, and he dropped Josiah's arm to face Eliza proper. Uppity little. That moment of distraction was all they needed. Josiah dove toward the back corner while Liddy swung her pestle hard against the nearest patroller's wrist. The man yelped and dropped his rifle, and the hounds outside started baying, fit to wake the dead. "Run!" Liddy shouted. Dinah grabbed the oilcloth-wrapped Bible and bolted through the door into the storm. Rain hit her like cold fists, and lightning turned the world white as bone for half a heartbeat. Behind her, she heard Eliza's boots splashing through puddles and Josiah's heavy breathing as he caught up. The lantern signal flashed again from the river, 3 quick swings to mark the safe path through the flooded lowland. Dinah angled toward it, her small body cutting through the storm like a knife, through cloth. Behind them, Silas was shouting orders, and the patrollers were stumbling around in the dark, their lanterns making wild shadows in the rain. The hounds had lost the scent in the downpour, and their confused baying echoed off the trees like lost souls crying. The river landing was underwater, the usual dock submerged beneath 2 feet of storm surge. But Eben's skiff waited in the reeds, and the old ferryman's voice carried clear through the weather. "Here, quick now, before they get their bearings." Dinah waded into the dark water, feeling mud suck at her bare feet. The Bible stayed dry under its wrapping as she held it high above her head. Eliza lifted her skirts and followed. Then Josiah, all 3 moving toward the small boat that bobbed like a cork in the current. Eben reached over the side and hauled Dinah aboard first, then helped the others scramble over the gunwale. His weathered face was grim in the lantern light. "Patrollers will be after us, quick as they can saddle fresh horses. We need to make the far shore and find shelter." He pushed off from the reeds with a long pole, and the skiff slid into the main current. The storm-swollen river moved fast and ugly, full of branches and debris torn loose from upstream farms. Lightning flashed again, and Dinah saw the patrollers bursting from the tree line, their lanterns swinging wild as they searched the water. But the boat was already in the channel, moving swift toward the opposite bank and whatever safety they could find in the dark. "Where can we go?" Eliza asked, her voice barely audible over the storm. Eben worked the pole steady, reading the current like a book written in water. "Country chapels on high ground. Reverend Bell won't turn folks away in weather like this." He looked back toward the landing, where the patrollers' lights grew smaller with distance. "Question is whether we can get there before they circle around by road." Dinah hugged the Bible tight and hummed the hymn soft under her breath. The melody seemed to calm the storm a little, or maybe just gave courage to the small boat carrying its cargo of hope through the wild, dark water. Behind them, the lights faded into rain and distance. Ahead lay the unknown shore and whatever trials the morning would bring. The country chapel sat on a rise above the floodplain, its white clapboard walls gleaming wet in the lightning flashes. Eben beached the skiff among the willows and helped his passengers wade through the shallows to dry ground. Rain drummed on the chapel's tin roof like 1,000 fingers, tapping out a frantic rhythm. Reverend Hiram Bell answered their knock in his nightshirt and spectacles, a lamp held high to see who'd come calling in such weather. His weathered face showed surprise but no fear. A man of God learned early to expect the unexpected. "Eben Yates," he said, opening the door wide. "And company. Come in before you drown out there." The chapel's interior felt like sanctuary, proper wooden pews gleaming in lamplight, hymn books stacked neat on the communion table, the scent of beeswax and old prayers hanging in the air. Bell built up the fire in the pot-bellied stove while his visitors shed their dripping coats. "Now then," the preacher said, settling his spectacles higher, "what brings folks out in weather fit to float Noah's Ark?" Eliza told the story plain, her mother's margin clause, the forged papers, Silas and the patrollers hunting through the storm. Bell listened without interruption, his face growing more troubled with each detail. "Legal manumission's a serious matter," he said when she finished. "But so's interfering with slave catchers, even when their papers are false." He looked at Josiah, who stood quiet by the stove, steam rising from his damp clothes. "You understand the danger you're in, son?" "Yes, sir. But I also understand Mrs. Ashford's promise, and Miss Eliza's courage in honoring it." Josiah's voice carried the dignity of a man who'd found his worth in truth rather than other folks' opinions. "If God wills me free, then I'll trust his providence." Bell nodded slowly. "Providence often works through mortal hands. Question is, what hands can help you now?" Dinah spoke up from where she sat cross-legged on a front pew, the Bible unwrapped in her lap. "Clerk Pike's got the ring that proves the manumission clause, and Judge Whitlow's due back from court circuit tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow's Saturday," Bell reminded her. "Court don't sit on weekends, but you could perform the Christian blessing," Eliza said quietly. "The margin clause says, upon completion of training and marriage under a Christian blessing. If Josiah's completed his learning—" "Has he?" Bell asked. Josiah stepped forward. "I can read and write, figure ledgers, teach children their letters. Mrs. Ashford saw to that before she passed, then the training conditions met." Bell stroked his beard, thinking hard. "But the blessing's only half the requirement. Still need official witness and recording." Through the storm, they heard a sound that made them all freeze, hounds baying in the distance, getting closer. The patrollers had found the trail again. "Root cellar," Bell said quickly. "Under the vestry. Space for 3 if they don't mind close quarters." But Eben was already at the window, peering out into the rain. "Won't work." "They got dogs now, and dogs don't care about hiding spots." He turned back to the others. "But I got an idea. Old smuggler's trick from my river days." He grabbed a jug of lamp oil from the vestry and started pouring it in a wide circle around the chapel's foundation. "Dogs follow scent. You confuse the scent, you lose the dogs." The oil smell would mask human tracks, at least for a while. But it was a temporary measure at best, and they all knew it. "There's something else," Dinah said, her voice small but determined. She stood and walked to the communion table, placing the Bible down gentle as laying a baby in its crib. "The hymn I've been humming, it's got verses that tell directions, secret verses the conductors use for the railroad." She sang soft. "Where the door swings wide, follow the drinking gourd, cross at the narrow place, trust in the Father's word. That's the old freedom song," Eben breathed. "Haven't heard it sung proper in years. It tells the safe crossing points," Dinah continued, "and where to find friends. If we can get to the narrow place by dawn, there's folks there who'll help." The hounds sounded closer now, their baying echoing off the hills like voices from a dark dream. But inside the chapel, around the communion table where God's promises were remembered every Sunday, a different kind of communion was taking shape. 4 souls bound together by storm and truth, ready to trust providence and take whatever path the morning might reveal. Dawn came grey and grudging through the chapel windows, showing a world washed clean by the night's storm. The patrollers had searched till past midnight, but Eben's oil trick and the driving rain had scattered their scent trails. Now they were likely regrouping, waiting for better weather and fresh dogs. Dinah woke on a pew cushion, the Bible still clutched in her arms. Through the windows, she could see the river running high and brown with runoff, carrying branches and debris from the hills upstream. But the worst of the storm had passed, leaving just the steady drip of water from the chapel's eaves. "Sleep well?" Reverend Bell asked softly. He'd kept watch through the night, tending the fire and listening for trouble. "Yes, sir. Dreamed about my mama?" Dinah sat up, smoothing her rumpled dress. She used to sing the freedom songs when she thought nobody was listening. Bell settled beside her on the pew. "Your mama was a wise woman. Songs carry truth farther than speeches, and they're harder to silence." Eliza stirred from where she'd dozed against Josiah's shoulder, the two of them finding comfort in shared watchfulness. Color touched her cheeks as she realized her impropriety, but Bell just smiled, gentle. "Nothing wrong with two souls finding peace together," the preacher said. "God honors love that's built on truth and tested by hardship." Outside, horse hooves splashed through mud and puddles. But these weren't the hard gallop of patrollers, just the steady pace of a single rider, picking his way careful over storm-rutted roads. Eben peered through the window. "It's Pike, riding hard for a man his age." The clerk dismounted at the chapel steps, his horse lathered with sweat and mud. He burst through the door like a man carrying urgent news, his face grim but determined. "Thank the Lord you're all safe," he panted, pulling off his soaked hat. "Silas has been spreading lies all night, says you're runaway slaves and their accomplices." Got half the county stirred up. "What about the ring?" Eliza asked. "And the manumission clause?" Pike's expression brightened a little. "That's why I wrote out in this mess. Found something in my grandfather's papers, a letter from your mother, dated just before she died." He pulled a folded document from inside his coat. "She explains about the ring, and why she left it with Liddy. Says it's proof of her intent to honor a promise made to a deserving soul." Dinah leaned forward, eyes bright with interest. "What kind of promise?" "A debt of honor," Pike explained. "Seems Josiah's father once saved your mother from a runaway horse. She vowed then that his son would have a chance at freedom, legal and proper." He smoothed the letter carefully. "This document, combined with the ring and the margin clause, makes a strong case for manumission. But we still need a judge to make it official," Bell pointed out. Pike nodded. "Judge Whitlow's due back from circuit court this afternoon. But here's the problem. Silas has convinced the sheriff that there's been theft and incitement. Warrants are out for all of you." The weight of that news settled over the chapel like a heavy quilt. Legal documents meant nothing if they couldn't reach a sympathetic judge, and reaching anywhere seemed impossible with warrants hanging over their heads. "There is one way," Pike said slowly. "Judge Whitlow's a God-fearing man. If you could present your case in a proper setting, with witnesses and full documentation." He gestured around the chapel. "Oh, what if court convened here? Emergency session, storm conditions, all legal and proper." Bell stroked his beard. "Chapel's been used for court before, during the flood of 47. But we'd need official notice, proper witnesses, and protection from Silas and his friends," Eben added grimly. Pike pulled out his watch and checked the time. "If I ride fast, I can intercept the judge before he reaches town. Explain the situation, request emergency session." He looked around at the small group. "Question is, can you hold out here till afternoon? And are you willing to stake everything on one hearing?" Dinah stood up, the Bible heavy in her small hands. "Sometimes God asks folks to step out on faith. Seems like this is one of those times." She walked to the communion table and opened the Bible to the Book of Ruth, revealing the margin clause in all its careful detail. The graphite letters seemed to glow in the morning light, each word a link in a chain of promise and hope. "Mama always said truth has its own power," Dinah continued. "Maybe it's time to let that power shine." The others nodded, one by one. Pike tucked the letter back inside his coat and headed for the door. "Keep watch," he called over his shoulder, "and pray for clear roads and an open heart." As the clerk's horse splashed away through the puddles, the small group settled in to wait. Truth was coming to trial, and only God knew what verdict the day would bring. The morning stretched long and anxious in the country chapel. Dinah arranged the widow's Bible on the communion table like an offering, its pages open to Ruth's margin, where hope lived in pencil lines, thin as spider silk. Eliza paced between the pews, her muddy dress rustling with each turn. Josiah sat quiet by the window, watching the road for Pike's return or trouble's approach. "They'll come for us before noon," Eben said, checking his rifle for the third time. "Silas ain't the waiting type, and those patrollers got their reputation to consider." Reverend Bell moved between them like a shepherd among worried sheep, offering water and cold biscuits left from yesterday's dinner. "Faith is tested hardest just before deliverance," he murmured. "Hold steady." Through the windows, the world looked washed and new. Storm clouds were breaking apart, showing patches of blue sky like torn fabric, but the peace felt fragile, ready to shatter at the first sound of approaching horses. "Tell me about your mama's promises," Bell said to Dinah, settling beside her on the front pew. "Help me understand what we're defending here." Dinah touched her red ribbon and let memory flow like water from a deep well. Mrs. Ashford used to visit the quarters on Sunday afternoons, not to check on work, but to sit and listen to the old folks' stories. She said everybody's got wisdom worth hearing, no matter their station. Her voice grew stronger as the memories took shape. One Sunday, Josiah's papa was telling about his young days when he worked the boats on the river. Strong man, steady with the poles. Mrs. Ashford was listening close when her mare spooked at something, snake maybe, or a sudden noise. She paused, seeing it clear as if it happened yesterday. That mare reared up and would have trampled her sure, but Josiah's papa grabbed the bridle and held on till she calmed. Got his arm broke doing it, but saved Mrs. Ashford from harm. "Ah," Bell nodded. "A life debt." She said so herself, right there in the yard, with everybody listening. Said someday she'd find a way to honor that debt proper. Dinah's finger traced the margin writing. Guess this was how she meant to do it. Eliza stopped pacing and came to sit beside them. Mother never forgot kindness shown her. She kept track of every favor, every act of mercy. Her voice grew soft with old grief. Maybe that's why she wrote those promises. She knew she was dying and wanted to set things right while she still could. Outside, dogs began barking in the distance. Not the deep baying of tracking hounds, but the sharp yips of farm dogs, disturbed by riders passing. Someone was coming up the chapel road, moving fast. Eben moved to the window, rifle ready. 3 horses, 2 patrollers, and, he squinted through the glass, Silas Crowell, sure enough, and they're carrying chains. "Back door," Bell said quickly. "There's a path through the woods." "No," Josiah stood up, his shoulders squared like a man facing judgment. "Running won't change anything. If this is the time for truth, then let truth come." Eliza moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. Together. Dinah clutched the Bible tight as the hoofbeats grew louder. Whatever happened next, the margin clause would bear witness. Mrs. Ashford's promises wouldn't die in silence. The horses stopped outside with a jingle of harness and creak of leather. Heavy boots stomped up the chapel steps, and Silas's voice boomed through the door. "Open up. We got warrants and legal authority." Bell walked to the door with dignity and tact, his hand steady on the latch. "This is God's house," he said, as it swung open. "You'll conduct yourselves respectful." Silas pushed past him, flanked by 2 grim-faced patrollers with rifles and manacles. His eyes found Josiah immediately, burning with the satisfaction of a hunter who'd finally cornered his prey. "There's the runaway. And his accomplices." He pulled folded papers from his coat. "Sheriff's warrants for theft, incitement, and harboring fugitives." "What theft?" Bell demanded. "Bible's stolen property," one of the patrollers said. "Belongs to the Ashford estate, and the girl took it without permission." Dinah stood up, her voice clear as church bells. "I didn't steal nothing. Mrs. Ashford wanted folks to know about her promises." Silas laughed harsh. "Little slave girl thinks she knows about law. Put the chains on them all, we'll sort it out at the lockup." But before anyone could move, new hoofbeats sounded outside. These were different, a single horse, ridden hard but controlled. Through the window, Dinah saw Clerk Pike dismounting from a lathered gelding, and behind him a second rider on a big bay horse. "Judge Whitlow," Eliza breathed. The judge entered the chapel with the quiet authority of a man who'd spent 30 years deciding between truth and lies, tall and lean as a fence post, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He surveyed the scene, armed patrollers, frightened fugitives, the Bible open on the communion table, and his mouth set in a hard line. What's the meaning of this disturbance? His voice carried the weight of law and long practice. Mister, Pike tells me there's been irregular proceedings. Silas stepped forward, confident in his warrants. Legal slave catching, Your Honor. Fugitives and their helpers, caught in the act. Judge Whitlow took the warrants, reading them slow and careful. Then he looked at Pike, who'd followed him into the chapel with a leather portfolio clutched tight. Mr. Pike has shown me some interesting documents, the judge said, including correspondence from the late Mrs. Ashford regarding manumission promises. He gestured to the communion table. Is that the Bible in question? Yes, sir, Dinah said, her voice small but steady. The widow's Bible with the margin clause, Mrs. Ashford wrote herself. And you can read this clause? Dinah nodded and began to recite from memory. Josiah, born in this house, training promised for ledger work, teaching. Upon completion of said training and marriage under a Christian blessing, to be freed by witness of the clerk's indigo-flecked wax seal. Judge Whitlow walked to the table and studied the margin writing, his practiced eye-checking for signs of forgery. But Mrs. Ashford's careful script was genuine, faded with age, but clear in intent. The handwriting appears authentic, he said finally, and the legal language is properly constructed. He looked up at Pike. You've verified the seal requirements. Pike opened his portfolio and withdrew the ring. Liddy had kept safe for years. It caught the morning light, the family crest gleaming gold and proud. This ring bears my family seal, Your Honor. It authenticated Mrs. Ashford's promises and validates the manumission clause. Pike's voice grew stronger as he continued. I also found this letter in my grandfather's papers, explaining Mrs. Ashford's intent and the debt of honor she meant to pay. He handed the letter to Judge Whitlow, who read it with the same careful attention he'd given the Bible. When he finished, the judge looked around the chapel with something like wonder in his eyes. Remarkable. Mrs. Ashford constructed a complete legal framework for manumission, witnessed and authenticated according to proper form. He turned to Silas, whose face had gone pale as old ashes. These warrants are based on what charges? Exactly? Theft of estate property, Silas stammered, and incitement to riot. I see no theft here, the judge said mildly. The Bible belongs to the Ashford family, and Miss Ashford has every right to access her mother's possessions. He looked at Eliza with something like respect. As for incitement, speaking truth in public hardly qualifies as riot. Silas pulled out the forged sale papers, his last desperate play. Josiah's already been sold legal. Got papers to prove it. Judge Whitlow examined the brown-sealed documents with the eye of a man who'd seen every variety of legal fraud. It didn't take long for him to reach his conclusion. These papers are forgeries, he declared, poorly executed ones at that. The wax is wrong, the language is improper, and they conflict directly with the manumission clause written by the actual property owner. He handed the false papers back to Silas with contempt. I could have you charged with fraud and conspiracy for these. The trap was closing around Silas like water around a drowning man. His scheme was unraveling thread by thread, and everyone in the chapel could see it happening. But truth still needed its final witness. Judge Whitlow settled into the front pew like a man preparing to hold proper court, even in a chapel sanctuary. The morning light slanted through stained glass windows, casting colored patterns on the wooden floor where justice was about to unfold. Mr. Pike, the judge said formally, I'm calling an emergency session of county court to resolve this matter of manumission. Do you have your seal and official materials? Pike patted his portfolio. Yes, Your Honor. Everything needed to record legal proceedings. Then let's proceed. Judge Whitlow's voice filled the chapel with quiet authority. This is a matter of competing claims, forged sale papers versus written manumission clause. The evidence will determine the outcome. Silas made one last desperate play. Your Honor, you can't take the word of slaves and children over legal documents. I take the word of evidence, Mr. Crowell. The judge's tone could have cut glass, and the evidence here is overwhelming. He turned to Dinah, his expression gentling. Child, place your hand on that Bible and tell me exactly what you observed about the seal colors. Dinah stepped forward and laid her small hand on the leather cover. I saw Mr. Silas's papers had brown wax, plain as mud, but Mr. Pike's official seals always got indigo color with white flecks from the mill grit. I notice the difference 'cause I watch careful when I see things that matter. Sharp eyes, the judge murmured, then louder, Mr. Pike, demonstrate your official seal for the court. Pike opened his kit and lit a candle from the altar. He melted a stick of indigo-dyed wax over the flame, and when it pooled soft, he pressed his brass seal into the warm mixture. When he lifted it, the impression was perfect, the tree crest with deep roots and spreading branches, flecked with tiny white specks from the mill grit. "This is my official seal," Pike declared. "Used for all county legal documents for 10 years past." Judge Whitlow compared the fresh impression to Silas's forged papers. The difference was stark plain brown wax against official indigo, smooth surface against grit-flecked texture, amateur work against professional standard. "The forged nature of these sale papers is established beyond doubt," the judge announced. "They have no legal standing whatsoever." Silas's face crumpled like wet paper. His scheme had collapsed completely, and now he faced charges of fraud and conspiracy. The patrollers who'd supported him were backing toward the door, wanting no part of his disgrace. "Now," Judge Whitlow continued, "let's examine the manumission clause itself." He studied Mrs. Ashford's margin writing again, then looked at Josiah. "The clause specifies completion of training and marriage under Christian blessing. Have you completed the training requirements?" "Yes, sir." Josiah's voice was steady and proud. "I can read, write, figure accounts, and teach letters to children. Mrs. Ashford saw to my education before she passed. And the marriage under Christian blessing." Eliza stepped forward, her courage bright as lantern flame. "We're prepared to marry now, Your Honor. Reverend Bell has agreed to perform the ceremony." A murmur ran through the chapel. Even for folks who'd followed the day's drama, the idea of a white woman marrying a black man, even a legally freed one, was shocking. "But, Judge," Whitlow raised his hand for quiet. "Under the terms of the manumission clause, such a marriage would complete the requirements for legal freedom." He looked around the chapel at the gathered witnesses. "This is highly unusual, but the law is the law. Written contracts must be honored." He turned to Pike. "Do you have the family ring that authenticates Mrs. Ashford's promises?" Pike produced the gold band with its tree crest gleaming in the colored light. "This ring bears my family seal and proves Mrs. Ashford's legal intent. Her letter explains the debt of honor she meant to pay." Judge Whitlow examined the ring carefully, comparing it to Pike's official seal. The match was perfect, same tree, same roots, same detailed craftsmanship passed down through generations. "Authentication is complete," he declared. "Mrs. Ashford's manumission clause is legal and binding." He looked at Josiah with something like admiration. "Upon completion of the marriage ceremony, you will be declared free under county law." Silas made one final, desperate protest. "You can't let this happen. It's against nature, against order. It's according to law." Judge Whitlow cut him off sharply. "And if you continue to interfere with legal proceedings, I'll have you arrested for contempt." The overseer's shoulders sagged in defeat. His fraudulent scheme had not only failed, but exposed him to criminal charges. The patrollers were already slipping out the door, abandoning their discredited leader. "Reverend Bell," the judge continued, "are you prepared to perform a marriage ceremony?" Bell stepped forward with dignity intact. "I am, Your Honor. Though I should note that such a union may face challenges in the broader community." "Legal challenges?" the judge asked pointedly. "No, sir. Social ones. Social challenges are for society to work out. Legal questions are for courts to decide." Judge Whitlow's voice carried final authority. "Proceed with the ceremony." And so, in a country chapel on a storm-washed morning, with justice as witness and truth as guide, the final act of Mrs. Ashford's promise began to unfold. Reverend Bell stood before the communion table like a man about to pronounce benediction on a miracle. The Bible lay open to the book of Ruth, its margin clause gleaming like silver thread in the morning light. Eliza and Josiah faced each other across that sacred space, their hands joined despite the years of law and custom that said such joining was impossible. "Dearly beloved," Bell began, his voice carrying the weight of ancient words made new by present courage, "we are gathered in the sight of God to witness the union of two souls who have chosen love over fear, truth over convention." Judge Whitlow sat in the front pew, like a stern but benevolent grandfather, ensuring that every legal requirement was met proper. Pike had his seal kit ready to record the marriage in the county books, making it official as sunrise. Dinah clutched her, red ribbon tight, watching history unfold before her young eyes. This was the moment Mrs. Ashford had written toward in those careful margin notes: freedom and love, joined together by the power of promises kept. Josiah, Belle continued, do you take Eliza as your lawful wife, to honor and cherish according to God's holy ordinance? I do, Josiah said, his voice steady as stone foundations. Before God and these witnesses. Eliza, do you take Josiah as your lawful husband, knowing the challenges you'll face and accepting them with willing heart? Eliza's voice rang clear as church bells. I do, as my mother intended, and as love requires. Belle reached for the family ring Pike held ready. The gold band caught the light like a small sun, its tree crest a symbol of roots running deep and branches reaching high. With this ring, Belle said as Josiah slipped it onto Eliza's finger, the promise is sealed. What God has joined, let no man put asunder. Judge Whitlow stood up, his voice carrying legal authority. By the power vested in this court, and according to the manumission clause written by Mrs. Sarah Ashford, I declare Josiah Freeman. He paused, recognizing the significance of the surname he'd just bestowed. I declare Josiah Freeman to be a free man, under the laws of this county and state. The words hung in the chapel air like incense, sacred and transformative. Josiah straightened his shoulders as if physical chains were falling away, and Eliza's face shone with joy and triumph. Pike stepped forward with his seal and official papers. I'll record this manumission in the county books, along with the marriage certificate. Legal and binding, witnessed by the court. He pressed his indigo-flecked seal into warm wax, the tree crest marking another moment when justice triumphed over fraud. The official documents would protect Josiah's freedom and their marriage against any future challenges. There's one more thing, Judge Whitlow said, his stern expression softening slightly. The matter of Mr. Crowell's fraudulent papers and attempted slave theft. Silas, who'd been standing silent in defeat, straightened with alarm. Now see here, I was just following orders. Whose orders? The judge asked pointedly. To forge legal documents? To deceive county officials? To attempt theft of human property through fraud? The questions hung heavy as storm clouds. Silas had no good answers because there weren't any. His scheme had been motivated by greed, not orders, and everyone in the chapel knew it. I hereby order your immediate arrest pending trial for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft, Judge Whitlow declared. Sheriff's deputies will escort you to the county lockup. The remaining patrollers, seeing which way the wind blew, stepped forward to take Silas into custody. The man who'd seemed so powerful at dawn was reduced to a common criminal by afternoon, his authority stripped away by the truth he'd tried to suppress. As they led Silas away in chains, Dinah felt a deep satisfaction settle in her chest. Justice had prevailed, and Mrs. Ashford's promise had bloomed into freedom for a deserving soul. But the day wasn't finished yet. Reverend Bell, Judge Whitlow said, I believe there's still a matter of celebration to attend to. New marriages deserve proper blessing. Bell smiled, the first genuine smile he'd worn all day. Indeed they do, Your Honor. Indeed they do. He turned to the small congregation that had gathered to witness miracles. Let us sing, he said, a hymn of thanksgiving for this day's mercies. And as voices rose in harmony within those chapel walls, the storm outside finally broke apart completely, letting afternoon sunlight stream through the windows like God's own approval of the proceedings. Truth had found its voice, love had found its way, and freedom had found its rightful place. The chapel filled with neighbors drawn by curiosity and word of mouth about the unusual proceedings. Farmers in their Sunday clothes, townswomen with their children, even old Timothy Fletcher who ran the mill and remembered Mrs. Ashford's kindnesses. They crowded into pews still damp from the morning storm, voices humming with wonder at what they'd witnessed. Judge Whitlow surveyed the growing congregation with approval. Marriage is a public institution, he announced, witnessed by the community it affects. Let all present bear testimony to what has transpired. Here, legal manumission granted according to proper law, matrimony blessed according to holy rite. Dinah sat in the front pew, the widow's Bible open in her lap, to the margin clause that had started everything. The pencil marks seemed to glow in the afternoon light, each word a link in the chain that led from bondage to freedom. She touched her red ribbon and whispered, "Thanks to Mrs. Ashford's memory." Clerk Pike worked at a small table, recording the day's proceedings in careful script. Marriage certificate, manumission papers, court orders, each document sealed with his official indigo-flecked wax, making permanent what courage had made possible. "There's still the matter of Mr. Ashford," Eliza said quietly to her new husband. "He'll need to understand what's happened here." Josiah nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Your father's not a bad man, just bent under worry and debt. Maybe freedom for one can lead to understanding for all." Through the chapel windows, they could see another rider approaching a familiar figure on a tired horse. Mr. Ashford dismounted slowly, his movements heavy with grief and resignation. He'd heard about the morning's events from patrollers fleeing Silas's disgrace. He entered the chapel quietly, hat in hand, his eyes finding his daughter immediately. The pain in his face cut deep, part loss, part shame, part recognition of truths he'd been avoiding. "Eliza," his voice cracked like old leather, "what have we done?" She went to him across the space, between pews, her wedding dress still damp from the morning's adventures. "We honored Mother's promises, Papa, the ones she wrote in her Bible." "Mr." Ashford looked at the open book on the communion table, seeing the margin clause for the first time with his own eyes. "Mrs." Ashford's careful script seemed to speak from beyond the grave, reminding him of vows made and debts unpaid. "I never knew," he whispered. "She never told me about the writing. She meant it as a surprise," Judge Whitlow said gently. "A final gift to settle her conscience about old obligations." "Mr." Ashford studied Josiah with eyes that saw clearly, for the first time in months. The young man stood straight and proud, no longer property, but a person with rights and dignity. The transformation was remarkable to witness. "Your father saved my wife's life," Mr. Ashford said slowly. "I remember the day that spooked mare would have trampled her sure. I meant to find some way to thank him proper, but then he took sick and died before I could act." He paused, struggling with old regrets. "Your freedom is the thank you I should have given years ago." Josiah extended his hand across the space between them. "It's not too late for understanding, sir. Not if hearts are willing." Mr. Ashford looked at the offered hand for a long moment, then clasped it firm. The gesture sent a murmur through the chapel master, shaking hands with former slave as equals, witnessed by neighbors who would carry the story forward. "There's still the question of the plantation," Pike said practically. "Debts and creditors won't disappear because of today's proceedings." "Mr." Ashford's shoulders sagged. "The Ferguson note's still due, and others after that. I may lose everything anyway." "Not everything," Josiah said quietly. "I know the ledgers better than anyone been studying them since I learned to read. If you'll have me as a partner instead of property, we might find a way through the financial troubles." The offer hung in the air like a bridge across troubled water. Partnership between white and black men was almost unheard of in that time and place, but desperate times called for creative solutions. "You'd work with me, Mr.?" Ashford asked, wonder in his voice. "After everything?" "For Miss Eliza's sake, and for the memory of your wife's kindness," Josiah replied. "Free labor's no good to anyone, but freely given skills might save what needs saving." Judge Whitlow nodded approvingly. "Practical wisdom. The law protects all citizens equally, at least in principle. Working together seems more profitable than working apart." Dinah stood up from her pew, the Bible cradled in her arms. "Mrs. Ashford wrote something else in the margins," she said, "about the household and how it ought to run." She turned to a page in Proverbs where more pencil marks caught the afternoon light. "A house divided cannot stand," she read aloud, "but one built on justice and mercy will endure for generations." The words settled over the chapel like a blessing. Mrs. Ashford had seen farther than any of them, planning not just for Josiah's freedom, but for the household's future. Her vision included partnership, understanding, and a new way of living together. "Then let it begin," Mr. Ashford said, his voice stronger than it had been all day. "A new partnership, a new understanding." He looked around the chapel at the gathered witnesses. "And a new way of doing right by all who work the land." Reverend Bell stepped forward with his Bible open to a different passage. From Ecclesiastes, To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to break down, and a time to build up. The afternoon sun slanted through the chapel windows, warming the faces of people who had witnessed something remarkable. Not just a wedding or a manumission, but a transformation of hearts and minds. The old ways were changing, slowly and carefully, but changing nonetheless. "Let us pray," Bell said, "for wisdom in the days ahead, and for continued courage to choose love over fear." As heads bowed and voices murmured amen, Dinah closed the widow's Bible and held it tight. The margin clauses had served their purpose, but the book would be passed down to other generations who might need guidance in choosing right from wrong. Outside, the storm clouds had completely cleared, leaving a sky washed clean and blue as hope itself. The porch of the country chapel faced west, where evening light painted the storm-washed world in shades of gold and rose. Lanterns began to bloom along the rail as neighbors lingered to witness the final blessing of a day that would be remembered for years to come. Eliza stood beside Josiah in the doorway, her hand still wearing the family ring that had proven their love's legality. The gold caught the lamplight like a small star, while evening swallows stitched patterns across the clearing sky. "Mrs. Freeman," Clerk Pike said with a smile, testing the sound of her new name. "I'll need your signature on the final papers, marriage certificate and partnership agreement." Eliza signed with careful strokes, her new name flowing from the pen like a prayer made visible. Josiah added his signature below hers, marking his transition from property to partner with ink and determination. Judge Whitlow prepared to depart. His emergency court session concluded successfully. "This has been a remarkable day," he told the gathered assembly. "The law is meant to protect justice and human dignity. Today we saw it do exactly that." He mounted his horse and touched his hat to the bride and groom. "May your marriage prosper and your partnership succeed. The county has need of citizens who choose courage over comfort." As the judge rode away into the gathering dusk, Mr. Ashford approached his daughter and new son-in-law with hesitant steps. The pain of the day's revelation still showed in his face, but something else glowed there. Too hope, perhaps, or the beginning of healing. "I want to ask your forgiveness," he said to Josiah, "for not seeing your worth sooner and for letting fear guide me instead of conscience." Josiah's response was immediate and gracious. "No forgiveness needed, sir. We all do what we think best with what we understand at the time. Today we understand more." Mr. Ashford nodded, tears threatening to spill down his weathered cheeks. "Your father was a good man. He deserved better from me, and so did you." He straightened his shoulders. "I aim to do better going forward. We all do," Eliza said softly, linking her arm through her father's. Mother's promises pointed the way. Now we follow where they lead. Dinah sat on the chapel steps, watching the adults work through their reconciliations. The widow's Bible rested beside her, its margins holding secrets that had transformed lives in a single day. She hummed softly the hymn that had guided them through storm and trial. "Where the door swings wide, where mercy flows like a river." Eben Yates approached from where he'd been tending his boat at the flooded landing. "That's a freedom song, little one. Your mama teach you that?" "Yes, sir," she said. "Music carries truth farther than speeches." "Smart woman." Eben settled beside her on the steps. "Mind if I add the harmony?" His weathered voice joined hers in the ancient melody, and soon others on the porch were humming along. The hymn rose into the evening air like incense, carrying prayers and promises skyward. Aunt Liddy emerged from the chapel carrying her healing bag and a tired but satisfied expression. "All the hurts tended," she announced. "Bodies and souls both mended proper." She paused beside Dinah and touched the child's shoulder. "You did fine work today, little healer. Your memory and courage saved more than one life." "I just remembered what needed remembering," Dinah said simply. "Like Mama taught me. That's the finest gift anyone can give, truth held safe until it's needed." Liddy smiled and continued down the steps toward her cabin. As full darkness settled over the countryside, the lanterns along the chapel rail cast dancing shadows through the trees. The wedding party and their witnesses began to make preparations for departure, but no one seemed eager to break the spell of the day's events. "Where will you live?" Reverend Bell asked Eliza and Josiah. "The plantation house might be complicated." "We'll build a new place," Josiah said. "Close enough to help with the work, far enough to give everybody time to adjust." He looked at Eliza with love and determination. A house built on partnership instead of ownership, with room for whoever needs shelter, Eliza added. Mother always said, home should be a haven, not a fortress. Mr. Ashford overheard and nodded slowly. I'll deed you land for building. Good bottom land by the creek, rich soil and clean water. He paused, then added with visible effort, wedding gift from a father who's learned to see clearer. The offer brought tears to Eliza's eyes. The day had brought not just freedom and marriage, but the possibility of family healing. Love had made room for understanding, and understanding had opened doors to hope. Time to go, Pike announced, gathering his papers and seal kit. Tomorrow brings new business, but tonight belongs to celebration. He climbed into his buggy, but paused before driving away. Dinah, he called, you've got a gift for seeing truth. If you ever want to learn clerking or law work, come find me. The county needs sharp eyes and honest hearts. As Pike's buggy rolled away into the night, Dinah felt a warm glow of possibility settle in her chest. The day had shown her that courage could change the world, and that truth held power beyond anything she'd imagined. The last lantern was extinguished as the chapel emptied, leaving only the soft murmur of voices and the gentle night sounds of a world at peace. Dinah walked toward home with the widow's Bible under her arm, humming the freedom song that had guided them all to this moment of grace. Behind her, Eliza and Josiah stood together on the chapel porch, the ring flashing once in the last light as storm clouds finally disappeared beyond the horizon. Their love had triumphed over law and custom, their courage had exposed fraud and freed an innocent soul, and their faith had opened doors that seemed forever closed. The hymn's echo lingered in the evening air like a door left open, inviting others to step through into whatever freedom might await on the other side. 6 months after the chapel wedding, the autumn sun slanted warm across the new house that Josiah and Eliza had built by the creek. White clapboard walls, wide windows, and a porch that faced both the big house and the road symbol of connection and independence in equal measure. Dinah sat on the front steps with a slate and chalk, practicing her letters while Josiah worked in the garden. Clerk Pike had been true to his word, teaching her reading and ciphering in preparation for work at the courthouse. Her perfect memory made learning easy, and her eye for truth made her valuable. "How's the writing coming?" Eliza asked, emerging from the house with a basket of mending. "Good, Miss Eliza. I mean, Mrs. Freeman." Dinah still struggled with the new names, but she was learning. "Mr. Pike says I might be ready for courthouse work come spring. Wonderful, though I'll miss having you close by every day." Dinah smiled and touched the red ribbon that still circled her wrist. "I'll always remember this place, and all the promises kept here." Through the trees, they could see the plantation house where Mr. Ashford was meeting with creditors and lawyers. The partnership between him and Josiah had proved profitable. Careful management and honest dealing had saved the farm from bankruptcy and earned respect from neighbors who'd initially been skeptical. "Papa's meeting with the banker today," Eliza said, settling beside Dinah on the steps. "Final payment on the Ferguson note. We'll be clear of debt by Christmas. Your mama would be proud," Dinah said softly, all her promises coming true. The widow's Bible sat on a shelf inside the new house, its margins holding memories of that storm-washed day when truth had triumphed over lies. The book was treasured but no longer secret, its lessons shared with anyone who needed guidance in choosing right from wrong. Josiah straightened from his garden work and walked toward the house, his free man's papers folded in his shirt pocket, where he kept them always. The documents had protected him from 3 different slave catchers who'd come sniffing around and had opened doors to business partnerships that would have been impossible in the old days. "Letter from Judge Whitlow," he announced, holding up an envelope that had arrived with the Morning Post. "He's asking our opinion on another manumission case down in Jefferson County." "He values your experience," Eliza said, pride warming her voice. "Our experience," Josiah corrected. "This was never one person's fight. We all had parts to play." As the afternoon wore on, neighbors began arriving for the weekly gathering that had become tradition at the Freeman house. Black and white farmers, townspeople, even some of the hands from other plantations, all drawn by the promise of honest conversation and shared wisdom. They gathered on the porch and in the yard, passing around news and stories while children played tag among the fruit trees. It was integration by invitation rather than law, but it was integration nonetheless, proof that hearts could change when minds were willing. "Tell about the chapel day," called out a voice from the crowd. It was little Mary Fletcher, Timothy's granddaughter, who loved hearing stories of courage and justice. Dinah stood up, the request bringing back memories bright as yesterday. She told the story simply, without decoration, letting the truth speak for itself. How a child's memory and a mother's promise had combined with a daughter's courage to free a deserving soul. "The important thing," she concluded, "is that everybody had a part. Mrs. Ashford wrote the promise, Miss Eliza spoke it brave, Mr. Pike made it legal, and Judge Whitlow made it stick. Even Eben and Aunt Liddy and Reverend Bell all had pieces of the puzzle." "What about you?" Mary asked. "What was your piece?" Dinah touched her red ribbon and smiled. "I remembered. When folks needed truth, I held it safe till the right time came." As evening fell and the gathering dispersed, Dinah walked to the edge of the porch, where lantern light met growing darkness. The autumn air smelled of wood smoke and possibility, and somewhere in the distance, a hymn drifted on the breeze, the freedom song that had guided them all to this place of peace. The door was swinging wide, just like the song promised. Not just for those who'd fought for freedom on that storm-washed day, but for anyone brave enough to step through into whatever mercy might await on the other side. Dinah tied her red ribbon into a small bow on the porch rail, a marker of memory and hope. The ring on Eliza's finger flashed once in the last light of day, and the hymn's echo lingered in the air like a door left open to tomorrow's possibilities. In the widow's Bible, the margin clauses had served their purpose, but the book's greater message endured, that love and justice, courage and truth could transform the world one promise at a time. And in a small house by a creek, where partnership had replaced ownership, that transformation continued every day. The storm had passed, the reckoning was complete, and the beginning stretched ahead like a road leading home. Truth had found its voice, and the voice was singing.